My mother and father were first cousins, and they didn't live that far away, half an hour nowadays by car. But at the time, when they saw each other was about once a year, and they went in horse carriage, and it was an all-day trip where they were invited for lunch and then went back in the evening. And somehow, eventually, my father was working in Porto, and my mother's father was working in Porto too. He was a civil engineer. He was building the Porto de Leixões. He designed all that. And he died in his 50s, very young. And my father was always very good at investing money, and somehow he started visiting the cousins and her mother and trying to help. And she was 18 when he died, and she was the older of 5 children, my mother. She was going to the university to take a degree because some friends said, you have very good grades, and now that you don't have a father to take care of you, things are tight. You can go with a scholarship and you can get a good job. And she did go to Coimbra to study and become an art teacher. And that at the time was very forward, that a girl alone would go and live in Coimbra studying. Eventually my father fell in love with her and asked her if she wanted to marry him. And she said yes, and he says, you don't have to study anymore, I take care of you. No, I want to do it. And after they were married in 1927, she for a year, she kept commuting by train from Porto to Coimbra and Porto, and finished her degree, and then she got a job as a school teacher in the public school, in the high school. As I see, she was actually kind of modern. And eventually her mother moved back to Oliveira das Mães, where they had a house, and she lived there until she died, and the family just kept going. Now, I was born in Lisbon, and Danielle was still born in Porto, because eventually my father and mother moved to Lisbon, because he started some business with João Ferreira and Francisco Ferreira. It was a very small thing, but the headquarters were in Lisbon. And for a while he commuted back and forth, but then they moved. Anyway, Lisbon was nice, but it was a very different thing than moving in Estoril, where we eventually, they built a house when I was 9 years old, and João was 7, and Danielle 13. And before that, we just used to go there in the summer, renting the house for 2 or 3 months in the summer. And by the time we were in the house in Estoril, we always spent August with my grandmother. That grandmother we spent the summer with was my father's mother. They had a big house, and we just relaxed, and my father never wanted his vacation at home because he said people keep calling me, and if I am not home, they will solve the problems themselves. Now with the cell phones, that I don't know how they manage it. And it was very peaceful, had a big home where lots of people could eat, growing vegetables, they made wine, and the cousins would come, the ones from Oliveira, they used to come too, and sometimes we had 14 people at the table for days long, because if the one from Oliveira came, that was quite a crowd. And I do not remember my grandfather that well. The only thing I remember from him is he's sitting in a corner making toothpicks because he had Parkinson. And since he had Parkinson, he couldn't move much, but he kept busy making toothpicks to do something, you know. It's sad. I never saw him really walk much. He was not in a wheelchair, but he was just come down and sit down, And that's sad. He used to be a doctor and go and see his patients in horseback. And my father, when he became a teenager, got his own horse too. You know, teenager, no, maybe 18, I don't know. Anyway, it's kind of nice memories, and I'm sure it's very changed now, because at the time there were hardly any houses around, and I haven't been in that house since I was expecting Isabel. In 1965, I went there with Klaus and with my parents. We had dinner there, and they were very happy that I had brought my husband to see the nice remembrance that I had. But they all tell me it's completely changed now. There's too many houses, but that's progress, I guess. Anyway, we had a good time, it's true. I danced when I was a teenager almost every weekend. I danced almost every night when you had the carnival until you finally, I have to stay home one day and sleep. Looking back, I think I had a very interesting and basically happy childhood, especially the teenage years. I had my very best friend, 5 minutes walk from my house. I had my neighbors too. We used to go to the school together. It was a very small school, private school that had so few students that eventually it closed, and we were never sure we were being taught properly what we had to learn, because in Portugal, if you went to a private school, you still had to go to the liceo, that's the public school, and take tests every 2 or 3 years to make sure you could pass. If you made a mistake, you didn't. My father didn't pass the 4th grade because he had 6 spelling mistakes in the dictation. And if you had more than 5, you had to stay a whole year just stuck with the thing. And some people are not good at spelling. Doesn't mean that they are not smart. Nowadays, the computer corrects your spelling. What's a lot better. And you are creative. We had pretty stiff teaching. All the teachers had to teach the same thing, basically the same books, because of those tests that you kept going every 2 years, quarter classes, 3rd grade, you know, everything was a little different. But we sure went out. When I was 16, I started going out a little bit to dances, but you couldn't go out to dances unless you had a chaperone with you. And I was very lucky to have Daniel, and of course I went to the same dances he went. Actually, the reason I got so many dances because his friends were a little older, and there's the sister coming out of age, and I used to go too. The first time he said, "I forgot you were here." And I remember going with my neighbors. There was a group, and we all went to dance at the casino. But the big group had to have a lady with us, and she had a very old aunt. She was maybe 70, 80. At the time, I thought she was very old. And she was always very friendly. She sat at the table, and we all went dancing, and she slept. But the honor is saved. You could go like that. Very old Daniel used to say that Portugal was 100 years behind in the customs since he didn't go to university in Portugal. He knew how different it was in England too, where he spent a year. And somehow after the 1973, Portugal changed after they had, 74, 25 de Abril was the revolution, 1974. Now, since we lived very close to the beach, I was on the beach walking in 15 minutes. In the summer, when we didn't have schools, I used to just about 11 in the morning, I walked to the beach. I used to stop at Teresa, and then we would go down to the beach, and until about 1:30 we stayed on the beach, and then we came back home and had lunch. And In the afternoon, well, we read or we met friends. It was very different. Um, Now, my mother says that there was a time that my two brothers decided she's a girl, she's no good, let's pick up on her. And I didn't like that at all. But then she said eventually Danielle decided to protect me because he figured out you shouldn't be mean to me just because I'm a girl. And Danielle, João used to always want to fight with me as long as I was stronger than him. And by the time he knew that he could always beat me, he wasn't interested in it anymore. Now, Daniel left when he was 18 because he went and started studying in Neuchâtel, Switzerland. And my mother made him promise that he would write every 2 weeks, and he found out it was more interesting to write to me, where I could tell him about our common friends, the young people, than to her. And we had quite a big correspondence because then I just told my mother what was happening. If there was anything he didn't want me to tell, we just didn't. You know. And if I had a boyfriend, if I didn't have to tell my mother, I didn't, because the moment you had a boyfriend, my God, we have to watch everything she's... The chaperone has to be around, as if the boyfriend would rape me, you know. What's ridiculous. And no wonder we become so close up with girlfriends and boyfriends, all the three of us. We usually didn't say anything. We used to go sailing sometimes too. I remember Anna Zickerman, she had a tiny little boat, and she took me sailing with her, and she used to get very angry at me if I didn't move my butt right with the wind and the waves. Oh no, you have to stick it out too from the boat. The boat is getting too much like that. You have to hang out, make it straighter. It was quite interesting. Once I went in a regatta with her brother, and believe me, it was a disaster. It was very bad weather, and it was not very good. It was really, really bad weather. With the regatta was only about 6 people in those little boats, but it was very exciting. And it was lucky we moved to Estoril because I didn't know how to ride a bicycle, and I didn't know how to swim. And my parents couldn't swim, neither did my cousins that didn't live close to the beach. And at least I was still young enough to learn all that. And the bicycles is because since the school was far away, each one got a bicycle to school. And my father tried to learn how to ride a bicycle, one held him and nothing happened. But we were still able to learn it, and I really did enjoy riding the bicycle and swimming. You know, maybe that is why I ended up by Marin County. There were many Germans in Portugal, and many British and Americans too in that area between Cascais and Lisbon. Somehow he had lived in Portugal before he was drafted to go to the war when he was 17. And he knew them, and he went and visited Ina, and they decided to go to the beach. And I used to meet her at the entrance to the beach. And sure enough, there she is with a nice blonde guy, and that's why we met. We just courted eventually through the letter writing. Actually, we started it just as a friendly thing. He was engaged first time I met him. Nothing happened except that he made me laugh. He was funny. And, you know, I was there 2 weeks, but eventually it just developed into something. We only start writing about 2 years later. All of a sudden he decided to start writing to me, and I was learning German because I had so many German friends, and I kind of thought it was kind of fun to answer him in German. And but then I had another German boyfriend, and he knew about it. But then somehow that didn't work out, and he had a girlfriend too that was actually engaged too, and that didn't work out. And then somehow in 1958 we decided to get married. What was very complicated. Now, beginning of August, he told me to try to find out how I could come to America. And I thought, God, this is complicated. And then you needed so many papers. And if you wanted a birth certificate, they said, oh, that takes 4 or 5 weeks to get the birth certificate. But then you put a little money under, oh yeah, you can have it in 3 days. The thing is, those people got so little money that I guess all those things under the cover is what made them live decently. I don't know. I don't know if it's still like this now. But during that time, the only way I could get the whole thing ready from about middle August until beginning of October was like that. And then we got married in Portugal. And the 25th of October, he only had 2 weeks vacation. And then he left a week later, and I come to America on the 19th of November is when I arrived in Seattle, and everybody was as friendly as they could be when I come over. There were a lot less people too, see? That makes a big difference. The trip here was quite interesting because we come in a small aeroplane, and the small aeroplane, the crew had to be changed after 12 hours. They couldn't fly the aeroplane more than 12 hours. And they were supposed to stop at Frobisher, Canada, but since it was November, had been a lot of snow, they couldn't go to Frobisher. And then the crew stopped to change the crew. But then we stopped in Winnipeg, and when we stopped in Winnipeg, we were all put in nice hotels for 12 hours that the crew could sleep. And then next morning, we're all driven to the same plane with the same crew, and we kept coming through Seattle, where I entered the United States, and then San Francisco. Next time we went in 1960, they already had the jets. Now, my parents were pretty horrified when I told them we were going to get married. Klaus told me, don't tell them anything before I arrive, and you can see change your mind. We haven't seen each other for a while, and somehow I went to the airport to meet him when he arrived. His parents were there too, and they drove me back, dropped me at the house, and I went over to the dining room, and I said, I'm going to get married. And they looked at me, and they said, well, let's go. It's time to go to a movie. And, well, that's all. I can't even explain how things are. But then I guess my father in the movie starts wondering, what is this all about? And came back, and when he came back from the movie, he knocked on the door to my room. I was still awake, and he said, you can't, you need papers. And I said, I have all my papers. Oh. He didn't say anything. But my mother said next day he put the pants from a suit and the top from the other suit on. And then we talked, and he said he didn't want me to come back later and say that I ruined his life. He felt I could decide my life. After all, I was 24. But wanted the address from his parents that lived in Portugal to, I guess, check if there was anything against them. I didn't even know that could be done. And then 2 or 3 days later, he said he could come and ask for my hand. And we got married at home, and my parents were very nice, and it was a nice party just with family, but it really was very sweet. Then we went to Arabida, and that's a lovely place that they have in Arabida. You can't sleep there anymore. It's a museum now, what is really interesting. And it was very nice that he worked with Panem, because we were able to go back almost every year. We went back and stayed with Klaus's parents and with my parents, and the kids loved it. We went to the beach, and it was very, very nice that we could do that. And I think they all have a little liking for Portugal. And it was nice they met the grandparents. It was good for everybody. Without Panama, I imagine we couldn't have done that. Some people are even jealous. You went back every year. Wow, the 6 of us. But of course, if we didn't make it, we stayed. And 1 year, I was expecting Carlos. I'm pretty big already, 5 months pregnant. And it took a week to get there. We couldn't go to Europe. Then we took a flight to Paris. And then in Paris, we had to stay 3 days and pay more to get a reserved seat. Actually, we had some fun. And my father was very upset, and my mother too. Well, when are they coming? But that was the only time that we had all those problems. That's when Panama was doing really, really well in 1967. And then, when I got married, we first rented a studio apartment in Sausalito. And Bear and Raquel were our neighbors. I think we got married almost at the same time, and we are still friends. And then we spent 3 months in the city because a friend went to Bangkok and said, why don't you stay at my place and take care of my stuff? I want to keep my apartment. I was bigger. And then we were so lucky. We were looking for another small studio apartment in Sausalito, and it was too small, was even smaller. But the lady looked at us and said, if you can afford a little bit more, I have a bigger one. And Klaus asked, where? Belvedere. Well, let's go. Anyway, it was part of the house that I had just bought at the bottom. It had a kitchenette and a big bathroom that came out very handy when the twins were born, and the living room, and the dining, and a bedroom, and that was enough for us. And we had a beautiful view over down, and we could see the ferries going all over to the city, because at the time you still had the trains that used to go in a ferry across. And the twins were born there. Eventually, we got another room across the hall where the grandmother used to stay, and paid $15 more for that. Somehow they liked us to be in the house. If they went somewhere, there was somebody in the house. They had a big house. Well, anyway, the twins were born in Belvedere, and there was a surprise because nobody thought we had 2 until Klaus started hitting 2 heartbeats, and they were 6 weeks premature. And it was a little scary because it was small, but they turned out to be nice and healthy and never had any sickness in the first year of their lives. And it was really fun to have them. And eventually we moved to Belvedere because they had steep steps. And with the steep steps, I had a hard time getting out with them, that they could go and get some fresh air and play. The strange thing is that before we went to Portugal, they were very happy in our apartment. But then we went with them in the spring to Portugal, and being in Portugal, in the afternoon we used to go with them to the grass where my parents lived, and they loved it, to explore the garden and everything. And Naomi, after her nap, she decided to tell me, certain times crying that she wanted out. I knew she wasn't talking yet. I knew exactly what she wanted to do. Then they were happy. But it was very hard to get out by myself. When I didn't have a car, only Klaus had a car. He was still working days and evenings. He wasn't working nights anymore like he first did when we first got married. When we first got married, he worked 2 weeks days, 2 weeks evenings, 4 to midnight, and 1 week nights. And that was kind of stressful for him. But by then, we worked days and evenings. That was a lot better. Eventually, it was only daytime. You know, as a snorri-tailed goes, then you have a lot more advantages. Isabel was born in Kentfield, but in the little house that we rented. And that was a lot easier. I had a very nice neighbor, Karen Yor, that used to come with Kimu, and we used to talk and watch the kids play. She used to come to our backyard, had more sand in her backyard. When I came over, I didn't know how to do anything. And Astrid Grant gave me a Betty Kruger cookbook and a cup and the measuring spoons. And I used to spend a long time trying to understand the recipes. I remember looking in the dictionary, separate the egg yolk from the white. What's that? Oh, then you understand, but you have to look in the dictionary. And Papa laughed his head off because we went to the market and they said 15 cents for the salad. That's about what the salad cost. And I said 10. Because that's the way you bargain when you went shopping in Lisbon in the market. Anyway, there were a few strange things like that when I came over. I was very, very ignorant. But, and I didn't know that much English either because I only had high school English, and you don't speak it. We speak French in Portugal with the foreigners, but not English. But I had learned the German, and I talked to Klaus. German was better than my English at the time. Eventually I changed to English because the twins were started to talk late, and I figured out the language they needed is English. It was very good for me too. But that was a lot later. And then we moved to Leland Way in Tiburon, and they had great schools, and the twins started going to school, but they literally ran to go to school, the twins. It was really, and they learned to ride a bicycle when they were 5 years old, and then we got the surprise of Carlos arriving in 1967, and that was actually, I got everything I wanted. I wanted 2 to 4 children, and I got twins, what I wanted, and I wanted a boy, and they came. And I remember when I wrote to Klaus that I wanted the twins, he sent back zwei Zwillinge. That is 2 twins. That means you get 4. I just fainted. Well, we managed with 4. Well, eventually we bought this house in Corte Madeira in 1973, and that was a very good thing that it happened. The family was bigger and the schools were still the best. Now we have a few little things that in Kentfield somehow a knife was forgotten in the garden, and the twins start playing, and one is running after the other with a knife. What's that? They rushed out, and I how it stayed there, probably from the barbecue. And Isabel almost choking Carla because they're taking a picture. There's a picture of that, and she's showing off, feeding Carla. And the first thing that happens when Carlos comes home, Isabel has always been very generous, and Klaus had given school buses to each one of them, a little school bus, and she throws school bus in the bassinet. It's for you. But he was so small, it didn't even touch him. But you can see how generous she was. They were all very generous and very excited about the baby coming. I remember Naomi making a picture of the family, and she has me with the baby already outside because she thinks about the baby that's coming. She was always a little mother. Well, they grew, and they all flew out of the nest, but they come back, and now I have 6 grandchildren and a nice big family. Is this enough?